This is the Brew World Order Podcast.
Welcome to the Brew World Order Podcast. My name is Mike Curtin. If you haven't subscribed yet, well, you completely blew it. But you could totally redeem yourself by clicking that subscribe button right now. Coincidentally, this is episode number 45, and in this episode I sit down with Greg Laird, co-owner of Ep.45 Brewing Company in Independence, Oregon, and also co-owner of Cascade Brewing Company in Portland, Oregon. Greg talks to me about the complications of finding the right location to open, how they came up with the name for Ep.45, and how they funded their business. He also tells us a funny story of how they sent some unusually watered-down sample beers to a potential customer. Between you and I, last night, I could have used some of those watery samples, because I have a monster hangover today. No, but seriously, I do have a problem. But luckily, the answer to all our problems is a brand new episode of the Brew World Order Podcast. So, sit back, crack open a beer, and enjoy the podcast. Hey guys, I'm Mike Curtin. This is the Brew World Order Podcast, and today I'm with Greg Laird, co-owner of both Ep.45 Brewing in Independence, Oregon, and Cascade Brewing in Portland, Oregon. Greg Laird and Ryan Booth were both roommates at Oregon State University. Ryan began homebrewing as a college student while studying fermentation sciences and even took an introductory class to beer, wine, and spirits, while Greg studied business information systems. After graduation, the two stayed close friends. Ryan went on to working as a food scientist, and Greg worked in healthcare software product strategy for a consulting firm. One night, the two were out with friends when one of them asked when they were finally going to open a brewery together. That moment seemed to spark a flame as the two got to work. For 2 years, they searched for the perfect spot, and while Greg worked on the business end of things to make things work, Ryan worked on his brewing skills. They settled on an old firehouse in the town of Independence, Oregon, and in June of 2019, they opened their doors to the public as Ep.45 Brewing Company. Not too long after opening, Ramey Mount, co-owner of Flyboy Tap Room and a former co-worker of Greg's, had reached out to him to talk to him about a potential business opportunity. Art Lawrence, the owner of Cascade Brewing, had become friends with Ramey and had let him know that he was looking to sell the business that he had built and owned for over 2 decades. Greg agreed to become a co-owner of Cascade Brewing along with Ramey Mount and his Flyboy Taproom co-owners Mark Becker and Brian Kovac. They officially became the owners of Cascade in April of 2020. And Greg Laird is here with me today. Greg, how's it going?
Doing well. How about yourself, Mike?
Not too bad, man. So
thanks for having me on. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you for being on. So Cinco de Mayo Festival in Salem, Oregon was the first time you guys had put Ep.45 beer out to the public, correct?
Yeah, I guess it's been 2 years to the day almost.
Right. And and today is Cinco de Mayo, so I just thought that was pretty cool. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So how did you guys come up with the name for Ep.45?
Well, the 45th parallel is kind of a major icon running through the middle of Oregon. So it's kind of the halfway marker between the equator and the North Pole. And we see a lot of businesses and things related to that. So we were just talking in the early days about things that we could reference to kind of pay homage to where we're from and kind of the area, because the Pacific Northwest is a really big beer scene. And we're staring at the 45th parallel and saying, hey, we should totally use that as a name of brewery. Nice.
So when you guys first came up with that idea, when you were out and somebody had said, you guys should open a brewery, from that moment that was sparked to the moment you finally opened your doors, what would you say was one of the hardest moments for you?
So I would have to say it was definitely finding a location for the brewery to be in. It was just really funny. When we started the plan, I thought the hardest thing was going to be to sell the beer and get people to be interested in it. I think Ryan's done such a phenomenal job of making such a great product that we haven't struggled with that part of the business, but we were looking for probably a year for different locations in West Salem and the whole Polk and Marion County areas until we found the place in Independence. And then it took about 18 months to do all the construction work on the building and get it ready. So the amount of prep work going into setting up the facilities was a lot more than I ever expected it would be.
Right. So you went from owning one brewery then dealing with a COVID shutdown, then owning a second brewery all within a year. What do you think's been the biggest adjustment you've had to make during that time? And what do you think's the biggest lesson that you've learned?
Well, I worked in the corporate kind of setting for 17 years in a consulting firm, and consulting is very fast-paced and aggressive work. So I was used to high stress levels and things like that.
Right.
But the brewery aspect and being something that's open to the public, and being an owner in the business, I definitely learned to be a little bit more flexible with my schedule. And how do I understand that, some nights I get a phone call at 9:30 because of a post that was made, and how do we want to respond to it? Or, 6 a.m, we're starting a brew schedule for the day. And so how do we have everything we need? And if something's missing, how do we go finish up the last details on it, things like that. So just having a wider schedule than the typical 8 to 5 structure, and things in that setting, just kind of being flexible to pick up any role. And I think the lesson learned is when you go into business for yourself, and working in the small business from being in a larger corporation, is you need to be able to be willing to do any job that comes up, right? Whatever's needed by the business is the job that you need to be working on right then and there. So you kind of got to check some of the job expectations at the door and say, we're going to do what it takes to be successful.
Right. When you first opened Parallel 45, how did you go about finding the capital to fund your business?
We did a combination of just infusing some of it from our own savings accounts, but the majority of it came from an SBA loan. So we did an SBA 7A, which is kind of a business startup loan. And that's really what we used to purchase the brewing equipment. We had fortunately, there's 5 very well known, maybe more at this point in time, but back then there was 5 really, really well known and well respected brewery manufacturers, brew house manufacturers, just in the Portland, Oregon area. Right. And so it was great for us to just have such great resources right here, and get to work with somebody local to build that. So that was an expensive project in terms of the capital expenditure, but it was great to be able to work with someone in our own backyard to build it out. So we used the 7A funds to purchase that, and then just some of our own money to put into the renovations on the building. Right.
What's something you never thought when you were first becoming a brewery owner, something you never thought you were going to have to deal with?
I never thought I was going to have to deal with. That's a great question. Well, I haven't officially had a fight at the bar yet, but I've had almost a fight at the bar. And early on, I started, when we first started opening, was taking a few of the shifts to just be the bartender, to pour the beers and do that sort of thing. And having to calm a couple people down a couple of times was definitely something it doesn't surprise me now looking at it now that you'd have to deal with something like that as a bartender. But, right. Walking into it, I was like, man, that was not on my list of things to be prepared for.
Yeah, right. Dealing with drunk people that are angry. It's not something you put on the checklist.
I think there's more angry people. I mean, because if you can imagine, right, what are the kinds of things that are going to start a fight in 2020? It was a mask.
It was a mess. There you go.
It's either an election or a mask, right?
Yeah.
Some things that start fights in 2020.
Oh, boy. So what do you think is a quality that you possess that makes you a good business owner?
I like to think of myself as a dot connector. I like to pay attention to everything that's going on and respond to, what people are saying, right? What do our customers want? And what are they telling us that they need, even if they're not using the words directly, right? To articulate what it is that they want, but just trying to pay attention to what's happening and how can we differentiate ourselves and add value to our customers.
Gotcha. So who do you think's inspired you the most in the beer industry?
There is this very romantic nature to making beer in the craft setting. Right. This isn't a really high, it's not a high volume production world. I mean, and to watch what the brewers can do, and in the case of Cascade, what the cellar masters are doing and the cellar team is doing with the beers in the barrels and that whole aging process, it's so amazing to watch like everything that can go into these beers, from the planning meetings where we're talking about them to the selection of the ingredients and the brewing process itself, and then the final packaging of the product. I think that is the thing I've been the most excited about, and honestly, the thing that gets me the most excited when I talk to other people. Like I really want to share with them everything that goes into these beers and what it takes to make them.
Really get a great understanding of the beers that you're selling.
Yeah. It's not the same thing over and over again. There's a lot of nuance, and they take time. The good stuff can take some time, and it's fun to experience it, and then I love sharing it. I love talking to people about it.
So how do you define success?
Well, in the last year, it's staying in business.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and in a COVID setting, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but all jokes aside, I think that for me, I want a team that's happy and engaged. I want the people who work for the company to feel like they're part of a group that's contributing in a positive way to the industry. That they get rewarding opportunities. They get some satisfying jobs for them as well to be in here, and then making a product that people enjoy. I mean, I think hearing somebody say that they taste something in the beer, or they really enjoy it, and they make a comment about how good it is, and it's their new favorite thing.
Right.
Is like, God, it's so rewarding to hear that. I had some folks that were from out of town, and they were visiting the brewery down in Independence, for Ep.45, and they went back home and sent me an email and was like, "Hey, do you guys ship beer? Because this is this is our new favorite beer."
Really?
And, it's so awesome to hear, like, "Oh, that's my new favorite beer."
Yeah, I'm sure that's an awesome feeling.
No better feedback than hearing something like that.
Yeah, right. Dealing with the whole chaotic shutdown and everything like that. In that moment from when you open your doors, the whole building of your first brewery, purchasing of a new brewery, it's a lot to take on mentally. How important is a mental break for you? And what does that look like?
Oh, it's very important, especially when when things were shutting down. We saw markets shut down, and this is interesting because for one brewery's really hyper local and focused in just a couple of counties in Oregon, and with Parallel 45, and Cascade's a global company, right?
Right.
We sell beer all over the world. But some of the similarity is that these markets are responding to the guidelines, right, that have been put in front of them, and for a lot of our customers, that means everything's going to slow down, right? Things are going to shut down. They're going to slow down. And so purchasing as a result of that is going to go down as well. And so probably one of the hardest things for me was just the inability to do anything about that, right? There's nothing we could do to make the market rebound. It was literally came down to just waiting, right? We just had to wait for sanctions to be lifted and rules to be lifted, or people to figure out how they're going to operate their businesses in some of these new models. I mean, obviously, you probably heard this from a bunch of different breweries that you've talked to, is a big shift from draft to package, right?
Yeah.
So bottles and cans, as a way to just be accessible to consumers. Because if they can't go into the restaurants or the bars, then they're not going to buy beer and draft. And not everybody's got a kegerator at their house, so
no.
How do you be available to them? But to your question about the mental break, how do you when there's nothing else to do, right? When you're just work, you can't just just busy work to try to keep yourself busy.
Right.
I personally like to read, and I listen to books, and I read books, and that's definitely a great way for me to just kind of develop myself and learn and grow. And I also like to run and ride bikes. Although my partner at Parallel 45 told me I'm supposed to keep that under wraps because, beer people aren't necessarily the big worker outer type of people. But to me, going out for a nice run or bike ride or something like that definitely helps me kind of regain some composure and some control.
Right. Yeah, staying active is good for the mental, man. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I love this question. What was one of your gateway beers into the craft beer world?
Gateway beers.
Yeah.
So this would be, back in 2001. I'm going to give you two, I guess.
Okay.
It was Fat Tire from New Belgium in 2001. It was like one of the first beers that came into Oregon in 22-ounce bottles, and I was like, wow, this is something special. I guarantee they have to have changed the recipe on that beer between then and now. But back then I was like, this is amazing, and it was very different than a lot of things that were out there.
Right.
And then Lagunitas came out with their Maximus IPA.
Oh, yeah.
Around the same.
Delicious.
Well, at least it got into Oregon around the same time.
Right.
Because I'd had their IPA before, but then it was like, oh, whoa, a 7.5% IPA? That's crazy.
Right.
Why would someone make a beer that big? And then, we released a 10% double IPA a couple of weeks ago. So,
yeah,
just keep getting bigger.
Those are some of my favorites. There's no doubt about it. A heavy IPA. I mean, I like that. Just one or two is all you need, and you're happy.
Yeah.
You're content after that. So the four of you have purchased Cascade, right? You have
Yes.
Mark Becker, Brian Kovac, Ramey Mountain, yourself. So what is the move now? What does the future look like for Cascade? Is there any big changes happening, or is it kind of like more of the just staying consistent and slight changes?
Well, I think from an organizational structure, like the people who work there, and what we want to, the workforce and what we're trying to do, you're going to see a lot of the same, right? I mean, we've got a great team in Cascade, some very talented people, and we want them part of the team. They want to be part of the team. It's been a year already, and everybody I think is still fairly well engaged, and we're having a good time. I would say, Cascade I think has built a reputation over the last couple of decades as being an innovator in the beer space, and so I would say there's going to be more of that. So we want to continue to be innovative in this space, and so what that should feel like to consumers is new stuff, right? Like we want to continue to play with it. I think we've had a return to some of our core offerings, our blueberry beer, the Krieg beers that just recently came out. We really tried to go back to how do we make those the best they can ever be. And so, a lot of local fruit out of the Pacific Northwest is great base products for us to be adding into those beers,
right,
and get the volumes up to the point where they're, the tastiest that they can be, and just been really happy with where those are going. So they're similar to what we've done in the past, but really just a focus on quality, focus on kind of being a premier kind of brand and product offering in that space. So we want to continue to do that. We've got some ideas for some other kind of newer stuff. We've had a couple conversations with bartenders, guilds, and different folks, and how can we do some more like cocktail inspired beers, maybe even do some stuff in the still beer setting,
right?
That we'd like to do. So hopefully it doesn't feel all that different in terms of what Cascade's been able to do in the past, but hopefully it's also still exciting, right? So some of these new things that we put out are still going to excite people and show them what a complex barrel aging program can really put out there.
Right, for sure. So if somebody had come to you and asked you advice on opening their own brewery, what advice would you give them?
Probably meet with me for beers for a couple of different times and talk it through. So I think that a lot of this is perspective from a guy who lives in Oregon, right? That has a lot of breweries. There's a lot of craft brewing in Oregon, and I think my experience is now a small craft brewery in Independence, which is a little bit more of a rural town in Oregon. I grew up in a town of 5,000 people, so to me that's home, and I love that. I love that place. And then Cascade's just a much bigger venture, but it's a very unique, kind of distinct product. And so I think that's the advice that I would have is around those, right? Does your community have a need for this, and how do you best meet that need? And as your community, what do you want your community to be? Do you want your community to be a couple of counties in your state, or do you want it to be global or somewhere in between?
Right.
And just really trying to figure out how do you build something that people are gonna really want and enjoy.
Gotcha. So did you happen to have a funny story for us?
Yeah. So there's probably the biggest fear I've had being in the beer space is there's this fear of, like, I put my beer into these packages and then I distribute it out to the rest of the world, and something bad happens to it. Right? That's probably like the biggest fear, is that something has happened but it's already out there, right? It's out there and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, you can get it back. You can go through all the energy and effort that it takes to do that. But that's probably one of my biggest fears. So very early on in my time in Cascade, we had this situation where one of our guys had grabbed a couple of sample beers to take out to a couple of potential customers, and we had this new place that had just put a couple of kegs on tap, and it was a local place, and we were excited about them and dropped off a few samples. And one of them was, one of Cascade's like flagship beers, right? This is our Bourbonic Plague. In 2020, it was rated the number 3 beer of the year by Wine Enthusiast. So great flagship beer for us. Phenomenal product. 2 years in barrels, dark beers, lots of flavors.
Right.
A wonderful product. And after dropping off these samples, we get a phone call later, and the person tells us, I haven't had this vintage yet, but this beer seems a little light. Like maybe there's not so quite right with it. And we all start freaking out, like, oh my gosh, what's happened? And so we go back to where the samples were, and we grab a bottle, open it up, and pour it out, and it's water. There's water in the bottle.
What?
and it turns out that somebody from one of the restaurants was hoping to get some sample bottles that they could stage. So they looked full, and they had the cork and cage on them, and so they looked good and everything like that. But they were just going to put them on display in a section of the restaurant as part of this deal. So they had filled up a case of beer with water, and then somebody had grabbed that case and put it on the sample shelf and like unpacked it on accident. So the good news is it was only one case of beer, but the bad news is that this poor guy grabbed up that case and started handing out his samples and managed to only have grabbed the bottles that were full of water.
Oh my God.
And we were all freaking out at that point in time, thinking that we had just filled hundreds of cases of bottles with water and shipped them around the world.
You can drink the whole case and you won't even get drunk.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, slight panic moments like that always add some levity.
I'm sure it happens. So I have a segment called Quick Fire 5 quick questions, beer related. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Considering you have 2 breweries, one from each that you'd recommend someone try.
Beers from the 2 different ones?
Yes. One beer from each.
All right. Parallel 45, I would say try our Radiation Vibe IPA.
Okay.
And then from Cascade, I would say try the 2020 Krieg.
All right. Favorite brewery other than your own?
I really liked. It's a few years back, but I really enjoyed my time at Maui Brewing Company.
Maui?
Yeah.
Okay. Favorite style of beer?
More and more, I'm really into German lagers.
German lagers.
Been really happy with Helles, Martins, and Schwarz beers.
Gotcha.
It's kind of a go-to.
Barrel aged, imperial, or both?
Yeah, you can do barrel aged imperials, right?
You sure can. Yeah. What do you prefer?
I think that the barrel age, I would have to pick it. I think that the oak just imparts a new kind of complexity to the beer that I take over Imperial.
Okay. And you have one keg of beer to hold you over for a 2-week quarantine. Which beer are you choosing?
By style or actual like
your
beer
actual beer? You're quarantined for 2 weeks, and you have a keg of beer. Which beer is it?
These are great questions. I think I go with Feet to Strength, which is a Martin.
Okay. Good enough for me. Well, Greg, that's all I have for you, man.
Well, Mike, thanks a lot for the time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I'm Mike Curtin for the Brew World Order podcast, here with Greg Laird, co-owner of Parallel 45 and co-owner of Cascade Brewing Company. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to my interview with Greg Laird, co-owner of Parallel 45 Brewing Company in Independence, Oregon, and co-owner of Cascade Brewing Company in Portland, Oregon. Whether you're passing through, you live in the neighborhood, or just visiting a friend nearby, you should definitely check both of them out. Also, give them all a follow on social media. Every other Sunday I'll be releasing a new episode, so subscribe and you'll never miss one. Also, check us out on social media, because it's just the right thing to do. I'm Mike Curtin for the Brew World Order podcast. You stay safe out there.